The amount of publicly released Nintendo 64 prototypes has increased dramatically over the past few years. Titles such as Clay Fighter 63 1/3, Glover 2, and even Conker's Bad Fur Day all have playable prototypes. However, a lot of these beta builds can't be played on an emulator, since they were designed to be played on actual hardware. But how would someone go about playing these glorious betas on his/her console? Well, a Dr. V64 can and was actually used as a cheap way for major companies to play development builds. But the Doctor is no longer produced and can rarely be found for a decent price on eBay. Not all hope is lost though. There's another, cheaper choice for playing these rare pieces of history: the EverDrive 64. Now, I'm not going to say it's a bargain. In fact, it costs roughly $129 for an NTSC version and $133 for a PAL version. But by the end of this video, I hope that you'll be able to determine whether or not you think it's worth the price. Let's start with its features. According to the official seller, the EverDrive 64 allows you to play and save almost any Nintendo 64 game ever produced, regardless of the region, from an SD or SDHC card. It also provides you with emulators and Game Shark support if you ever feel like cheating at a game. First off, I want to make sure you understand that I do not support piracy, regardless of how old a game is. I do, however, want to let you know that it is completely legal to play backups of games you already own. Playing hacks of games you own is also fine, and the EverDrive supports many of these hacks and mods. I spent countless hours shooting my comrades in Peach's Castle with the GoldenEye 007 mod, and Banjo-Kazooie mods work as well. I modeled this custom level in Maya and brought it into Banjo-Kazooie with the amazing tool Banjo's Backpack. As you can see, the mod runs perfectly on real hardware. But other game hacks aren't so cooperative. Almost every Super Mario 64 hack won't run on the EverDrive 64, but it's not the cartridge's fault. These and many other hacks, including Ocarina of Time, were designed to be run on an emulator and won't work on actual hardware. When I received the EverDrive 64, it came in a simple box with bubble wrap on top to protect it during shipping. The cartridge is actually made from an original Nintendo 64 game and repurposed for the EverDrive. Because of this, it's stated on the website that there may be a few scratches on the cart. The one I received did have some scratches on it, but they were so small and few that I didn't even notice them the first time I looked at it. There were no instructions included with the EverDrive, which made setup a bit confusing. When you boot up the EverDrive for the first time, you're presented with the only set of instructions to help you. It will tell you to download the latest firmware off the official website and put it on the root of your SD card. This will not only allow you to use the EverDrive, but it also adds the only emulator included with it: Neon 64, a fairly decent NES emulator for the Nintendo 64. This emulator was not created by the team behind the EverDrive 64 and was last updated June of 2004. So don't expect any compatibility updates anytime soon. It can play almost every NES game though, and has quite a few Famicom games that work as well, with only a few barely noticeable slowdowns that only usually occur when there are a large amount of characters on the screen. However, the emulator cannot play any Famicom Disk System games, which includes the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2 and Versus Excitebike. Some Disk System exclusive games have been lovingly ported over by hackers and can be played on the EverDrive's emulator, but these hacks are usually laden with bugs and graphical glitches, like Super Mario Bros. 2, which lacks the title logo. Adding and playing NES games is very easy. Simply copy the games to your SD card and load them by pressing the A button and selecting Start. In contrast to the simple game loading, the way the Neon 64 emulator saves is pretty confusing for the first few times. First off, you need a separate controller pack for the Neon 64, and because the emulator uses its own format to save, it will need to wipe your controller pack as well. Now to save to the pack, you'll need to save your game like normal and then press the L and R buttons to open the emulator's options. You then select the option Save SRAM to save your game to the controller pack. If this is your first time doing so, you'll also have to choose a title for the game. It may seem like a lot of work at first, but soon it becomes habit. And besides, most NES and Famicom games don't save anyways, so you won't be doing it very often either. But that's enough about NES games. Let's talk about what the EverDrive 64 was meant for: Nintendo 64 games. Adding games to the EverDrive could quite literally not get any easier. Simply format any SD card to FAT or FAT32 and copy your backups anywhere on the card. That's it. In fact, I personally made folders for each category so I can keep them all nice and organized. You can even customize the background of the EverDrive with any 480p resolution 24-bit bitmap image, many of which can just be found online. Almost any Nintendo 64 game runs on the EverDrive, and I say almost for a few reasons. First, some games require patches. Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, and Battle Tanks all require a patch for some reason or another. A link in the description will help you find out how to get these patches. A few games, however, are unplayable. These games include the original Animal Crossing, a Mario photo editor, and a video game creator, all due to a lack of needed hardware. There is one game though that boots, but has graphical issues that make it unplayable. Pokemon Stadium 2. No patch exists yet to fix this problem, but if you're willing to lose a few features of the EverDrive by using an earlier firmware, it'll play just fine. On a side note, in order to save any Nintendo 64 game, you have to press the reset button after you finish playing, otherwise it won't save. While I never forgot to do this, I can just imagine beating the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time, only to forget to press the reset button. Gosh, that's a terrible thought. A feature of the EverDrive I was most looking forward to was the GameShark cheat support. This allows you to do all kinds of things, from making Conker move extremely fast, to allowing Mario to fly even without the wing cap, while shooting smoke and stars. But the EverDrive has its fair share of issues with this. First off, the GameShark's implementation is very unintuitive. You can only use 25 codes at a time, including the master code. This isn't so bad since many people will barely use more than 8, but that's not all. In order to make the codes run, you have to first boot the game, then reset the console, then enter the codes you want to use, and lastly press start on the controller. If that wasn't bad enough, whenever you launch a new game, every cheat code is erased. That means you have to re-input the cheats every single time you want to use them. You might be thinking, that's not too bad, but I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. The biggest problem is that not every code in game will work. From my personal time with the EverDrive 64's GameShark function, I found that only one cheat for Conker's Bad Fur Day worked. Some games, however, do great. Almost every cheat I tried for Super Mario 64 worked as expected, but other games like Super Smash Bros. Didn't work for me at all. Now to be fair, I didn't test every single GameShark code for these games, but after 5 hours of trying to get it to work, I really didn't want to. So needless to say, I won't be using the GameShark functionality very often. Oh, and also, if you ever have the idea of sticking the EverDrive 64 on top of your GameShark, take my word for it, it won't work. Well, this is all fine and informative, but because you're watching a Beta 64 review, I'm sure you're more interested in how the various Nintendo 64 prototypes play. There are quite a few of these prototypes available to the public, many of which have only come to light in the past few years. Prototypes like the Majora's Mask Debug ROM, the Perfect Dark 6.4 beta build, and the Donkey Kong 64 Not For Resale ROM can all be found with a simple Google search and added to the EverDrive by copying it to the SD card. You may be asking though, why can't I just play these on an emulator? And the truth is, you can. Kinda. Nintendo 64 emulation is still very much imperfect. Games like Donkey Kong 64 and Conker's Bad Fur Day still have some issues in emulators, even today. And the same goes for their beta builds. Conker's ECTS demo suffers from frequent crashes on emulators, as well as this. Oh gosh. Oh no, no, make it stop! Make it stop! Okay. Whew. In stark contrast to whatever that was, the EverDrive played every single prototype I threw at it without any issues whatsoever, which is to be expected since they were all designed to be played on a real console. To this day, many people are still discovering Nintendo 64 prototypes. So it's nice to know that whatever comes about, the EverDrive 64 will play it. So in the end, the EverDrive 64 does what it set out to do, play Nintendo 64 games. And the team could have stopped there, but thank goodness they didn't. Emulators are perhaps my most favorite addition. From the included NES emulator to ScumVM, there's so much more to the EverDrive than just Nintendo 64 games. And even though these emulators do have their fair share of drawbacks, and a lot of them, at least I can play Monkey Island 1 with only minor slowdowns. So before I break out in song, this has been a Beta 64 review of the EverDrive 64. Thanks for watching.
If you try to fight us, you will get a nasty whack, and if you disrespect our singing, we will feed you to a crack, and our pirate eye was meant to be. Trim the sails and roam the sea.